to the Polgar Chess University. In this week's lesson, I'd like to tell you about something very important, and that is defense. We all like to attack, but a chess game is not only about that. We constantly need to recognize our opponent's threats and goals. Let's see our first example. Here we are. An experienced player would right away notice that the black queen is in danger. If it were white's turn, the white knight would immediately capture that queen. If you're playing on the black side of the board, you'd have to react to that threat. In general, that's how the thought process should work. Every single move after your opponent moves, ask yourself the question, why did he or she make that move? What is his or her threat? And then obviously, if there is a threat, you need to respond to that. In this case, there are numerous good choices. The queen needs to find a safe square to go to. Such are, for example, c6 or c4 or f5, just to mention the better ones. In some cases, you can consider to counterattack, which would not be recommendable in this particular case. Here, if black would choose to move his rook to d8 and attack the white queen, he'll be sorry, because after knight takes queen and rook takes queen, white will also capture the black rook, leaving white a rook ahead. Let's move on to our next example. Try to figure out which black piece is in danger and which white piece is the attacker. Well, it's not too hard to figure out that it's that bishop on d5 that's being attacked by white's rook. What are black's choices here? Well, one option to look for always is to simply move away to a safe square. And there is one safe square for this bishop in this position. And that is moving the bishop back to c6. All other squares for the bishop would not be safe. For example, would the bishop move to e4, the white knight could capture. In this position, there is an additional option, and that is to protect the bishop. Knowing that rooks are worth 5 points, while the bishop only 3, we of course should not worry about what happens if the rook still captures our bishop, because the rook can recapture, giving black a material gain of 2 points. Naturally, white is not forced by no means to capture that bishop, and then there is a material balance after this position. In our next position, it's black's turn again. And the first thing you need to recognize, what is white's threat? If you're playing with the black pieces, you need to see where's the danger coming from. In this position, the danger is that the queen is attacking that bishop on g4. So black needs to do something about it. Either move the bishop away or protect the bishop. Protecting the bishop with a pawn moving to h5 I don't really like, because typically the 3 pawns in front of the king are there to defend the king. And we usually do not want to push it up 2 squares. Maybe just 1 square, so the king will have a little escape window against some potential back-rank checkmates. But generally, it's not a good idea to move a pawn up 2 squares. The bishop could retreat, for example, to f5 or to e6, which are okay moves. Not the best choice though. Protecting the bishop with the queen is also reasonable. But the best choice is to actually capture white's knight. As we know, both bishop and knight are of the same value, 3 points each. However, in this case, this exchange is clearly to black's favor because it forces white to recapture and ruin the pawn structure and clearly weaken the defense in front of the white king. The next example is a bit similar in several ways. Again, the black bishop is the one in danger. Can you see which white piece is attacking it? Yes, indeed, it's the pawn from a3. So black needs to react to that, as a pawn is only of 1 point value versus the bishop's 3. So it would definitely not be a good trade to lose a bishop for just 1 pawn. Similarly to the last example, the bishop has plenty of safe options to retreat to, but the best choice again is to trade the bishop for a knight, because again, the white pawn structure is ruined. Pawns that are isolated, meaning not having any other pawn on any neighboring file, are inferior to pawn chains that are nicely connected. Moreover, having 2 pawns one top of another, like white has along the c file, are further disadvantage because the pawn that's behind usually are restricted in movement. And let's move on to our next example. Try to figure out which black piece is in danger in this position. Well, it is the pawn on e5. The white knight from f3 is attacking that pawn. How can black defend against it? If you look around, you will notice that none of the black pieces can protect that pawn. But of course, there are always several potential ways to defend against an attack. You may run away, you may bring another piece to defend, or sometimes you may capture your attacker. In this case, you simply should run away, and black is doing fine. Let's move on to the next position. And here it's quite clear that the white rook is aiming to capture the black rook. What are black's choices here? Well, one is to run away along the 5th rank or to trade rooks. It would not be a good idea to move the rook away, for example, to b5, because it would leave the pawn on a7 hanging. White could capture that pawn with a check, and then after black would move out of the check, white would have time to then save his pawn on the b file. Therefore, black's best choice is, learning from the previous 2 examples, to trade rooks, because in addition to saving his own rook and pawn, it forces white to recapture and double up his pawns. In situations like this, one pawn of black's on a7 can successfully hold off 2 pawns of white's because they are on the same file. This would give black a winning advantage because they have 2 pawns that are connected and ready to run. Let's see the next example. We're moving on to different type of challenges. In this position, in addition to the white queen attacking the black knight, there is a much more devastating, serious threat. The most serious threat of all, a checkmate threat. The white queen, in addition to capturing the knight, is also threatening to move to g7 because the pawn on h6 is also controlling that square, and that would be a checkmate. When you see a checkmate threat, you have to stop and drop everything else. You need to focus how to defend against that. Of course, except if you can give a checkmate yourself, that's a priority. Or sometimes you can give a check to delay the defense on the checkmate. But in this situation, black does not have a good check because the only check at his disposal would be the knight check, which would be simply captured, and then black would be stuck with the problem. So the question is, how and if black can guard that key g7 square? And here the answer is a clear yes. The knight should move to f5. So now if white would play queen g7, the knight could just capture it. The good news about knight f5 is that not only that black prevented white from giving checkmate, black also attacked the pawn on h6. Let's see a very similar but different position. In this position, which is almost identical to the previous one, the big difference is that black does not have a knight. The question is, who will then protect against the checkmate? Well, there was another difference as well. Black has a pawn instead of his knight on b4. And with that little pawn's help, black is able to safely capture the pawn on c3. So after queen g7, the queen can capture. Or if white would capture the queen, the pawn is there to recapture, leaving black in a totally winning position, having an extra rook. Let's see another similar but different position. Here, black doesn't have neither his knight nor his pawn to help in the defense. Luckily for black, the queen is better positioned though. Here, the solution is to capture white's pawn on h6, and therefore the checkmate threat is gone. What I'm trying to show you through all these examples, different ideas on how one can defend against a threat. As we saw, we could bring a certain piece to defend the key square where the checkmate is about to come, or sometimes you remove one of the opponent's pieces that is instrumental in the threat. Let's move on to our next example, where we yet use a third method to escape from a threat. The threat is the same, the white queen moving to g7. In this position, black is unable to actually guard that square. On the other hand, the black king is ready to run. And after the check on g7 or h8, the king can escape to the other side of the board and avoid the checkmate ideas. Let's continue with some more checkmate ideas and how to defend against them. This is one of the most typical checkmate threats against a castled kingside position. The first question you need to ask yourself, what's the threat? The threat is checkmate in 1 by white, the queen capturing the pawn on h7 with the support of the knight on g5. At this moment, black doesn't have any piece that could come to the rescue of that pawn on h7. However, the pawn itself can move forward and prevent the checkmate, leaving black in a better position because black has an extra pawn. Let's change the story just a little bit and look at this position where white has his queen on d3 instead of h5. Nevertheless, the threat is the same. The white queen aims to get to h7 from d3 this time. The same defense would not work because after h6 the white queen could still move behind that pawn and give checkmate just as well. The good news is that black has here several ways to defend. One way would be to interpose another pawn between the queen and the h7 pawn. A better way would be not even to weaken the king's side and bring the knight to help to defend again the h7 square. However, neither of those two moves are the best. Always look not just a good move for a good move, but for the very best move. As the famous saying goes, when you see a good move, look for a better one. And that's very true in this case. Here, black is able to simply capture white's knight for free. Anytime throughout your games, always look out for the opponent's pieces. See if there is one that's just hanging there that you can capture for free without losing any of your pieces, or at least winning a more valuable piece than you would lose. In this case, black simply won a knight and is up a knight and a pawn, a big advantage. The following position, white is threatening again a totally different type of checkmate. White has a queen and a rook all the way in the 8th rank, creating a threat. Can you see where does the white queen want to checkmate? Is it on g8 or h8? It's only in the corner. If the queen would move to g8, the black bishop would capture it. So the threat is only queen to h8. The question is how to defend against it, considering that black cannot defend directly that key square. What black can do is make an escape square for the king. The correct move is pushing the g-pawn up. So after the queen checks, the king can escape, and after a second check, black can easily block that check, even avoiding repetition of moves with check, check, check. Simply block with the bishop, and now white ran out of any decent checks, and then black would follow up, advancing his b-pawn. And now let's see a tricky example. In this position, not only that the black rook is under attack, but white has a more hidden plan. If here black carelessly would move his rook out of the bishop's way, attacking it in fact, then the white bishop would not need to move, but white would be ready to give a checkmate himself immediately on h8, as the white bishop is guarding that key square. So what should black do to avoid both the checkmate and losing his rook? Of course, black could protect the rook, for example, and lose the rook for a bishop. But you only would want to do that if you cannot avoid losing the rook altogether. And here there is an excellent way by moving the rook to h5. That will prevent the checkmate, and it would be offering a trade of rooks of equal value and not losing a rook for a bishop. There are also other situations, like in the following position, when you may disregard a threat to your own piece because you can win an equal or higher value piece of your opponent's. Again, in this position, the first thing you need to do is figure out which of your pieces is in danger. And the answer to that question is your rook. The white knight is about to capture that rook. Naturally, that rook may move away at this moment to one of the numerous safe squares. But here, black can do better. Black has at his disposal a very strong check, because this check not only attacks the king, but it also attacks the white queen. So therefore, even if black will end up losing that rook on d6, will come out ahead, winning white's queen. And finally, a simple position where white has a very common threat, the back rank checkmate. What are the various ways to defend against that? Well, here they are. Black can choose to simply protect that square either with his knight or with his rook. Other options would be to try to run with the king towards an escape square. Perhaps the best choice is to open a little window either by moving the f pawn up or by moving the h pawn up and opening a little escape square for the king. Remember, you certainly wouldn't want to open the g pawn because then the white bishop is still controlling the escape square on g7 and would end up giving checkmate on the following move. Well, I hope you learned the lesson that you always need to be aware of your opponent's threats, and on every single move, ask yourself before you make your move, what does my opponent want to do? And only after answering that question, move forward and think of what you're gonna do next. Well, thank you for listening and be back next week. I'll tell you more secrets about chess. Bye-bye.